Okay. Looking like everyone's coming into the room. That's fantastic. Just going to pause. Speaker today, Nicholas Holmes, digital change and transformational specialist at Omniplex, taking us through the idea of learning in the flow of work and making it a reality for your workforce. Nicholas, over to you.
Thanks so much, Don, and thank you for the introduction, and thanks to everybody for turning up today from all over Europe, and I can also see even in Australia. So thank you everybody for taking the time to come and learn about what I think is quite an important topic, and I'm really looking forward to going through some ideas on it with you. So what do we want to cover today? Well, I'd like to set the scene a little bit first to talk about where we are in terms of training, and specifically around systems training, which is where I do the majority of my work. I want to talk about some hard truths, which I think we might need to accept as L&D specialists. And then I'm going to kind of give a framework for getting started with learning in the flow of work, followed by some solutions and quick wins. And then at the end, we're going to do a quick Q&A. So to kick us off, just to give you a bit of background on me. I work in change and transformation at Omniplex. And predominantly that means that I support clients of Omniplex Guide, which is Omniplex Learning's digital adoption solution. So basically we're here to help train learners on how to use software. I joined Omniplex Learning through the acquisition of Nicholas, which is a digital adoption platform that Omniplex Learning acquired. And Nicholas was founded in 2014 with really that goal of showing people how to use software. So my background is firmly in technology. I started my career more years than I care to remember ago at Accenture. And there I was working with huge multinational corporations across Europe on change initiatives. So I've seen sort of my fair share of really good and really bad software rollouts. And it's something that is still a challenge today, arguably even more so than when I started my career. So that's a bit about me. And I work, as I said, with Omniplex. And Omniplex is really kind of a company that seeks to offer a full suite of learning and development products. Services that cater for every need. We offer authoring tools such as Articulate, which everyone will have heard of, Beyond, which is about video animations, and Uptail for immersive learning. We sell LMSs, so we're a partner of Docebo and Rise.com. And then around that, we have our fantastic Omniplex Studio team who specialize in content creation, Omniplex training, who are delivering the content, and then finally our digital adoption solution, which is Omniplex Guide. So Omniplex is a fairly kind of all-encompassing product offering, as a company. But our mission is really to enable individuals and organizations to reach their full potential through learning. And I'm going to stop there and just ask a question of the audience. And so my question is, what's the biggest change in learning that you've seen as L&D specialists in the last 10 years? Or, if you can, go even further back. What's the biggest change that you've seen?
Nicholas, I'm really interested in hearing people's answers to this. Like yourself, I've been in this field for longer than I care to remember, and I can go back to the mid-80s. Please, we've got a big box underneath that question. What's the biggest change? Please put your answers in the box there if you can. And I can see everyone's dropping their answers into the general chat. I'm going to copy some of those over. But actually, it's very interesting seeing the answers coming in already. Lots of thoughts there. Please put the answers over in the left-hand box if you can. Video, says Dan. Tamania saying on demand. Acceptance of online learning, Helmer is saying. And Jeff, very similarly, Jeff from Australia saying adoption of digital technology. So video again, says Louise. Shift, says Colin, from face-to-face to digital video. So, and Beth, an interesting point here from Beth, a desire for very short interventions. So there's if you like, there are a lot of people like Andre saying the shift to digital. I think there's generally a lot of people talking about specific tools here, but there's also a feeling, I think, about people's acceptance of it. So there's the technology there and there's the behaviors around it. So Shanice is saying less need to travel. And companies started seeing learning, this is interesting from Anna, not as the typical academic style, but with providing learners the ability to practice as they learn. So a shift from, if you like, didactic training to helping people learn in the flow of work. Nicholas, a range of things there, but I think we have a combination of the technical side of things and also the behavioral side of things. Is that what you were expecting?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and some of the things that have come up here are things that I will speak to in this presentation, particularly around on-demand learning, micro-learning, that shift from face-to-face to digital, as Colin says. This is all really, really kind of pertinent stuff to what we're going to be discussing today.
Yeah, people. I can see. I don't know if you can. I can see people still typing. So let's keep the question running and the people answering for a while. Shorter and shorter attention rate, says Margareta from Sweden. Higher expectation. So shorter attention, higher expectation. And I think what I find very interesting from Margareta, the idea of purpose. So people very focused, either on the short term and people often talk about the need to support performance, but also Margareta is saying career possibilities. So people clearly focused on not just the short term.
And the expectations of users is something that we'll be discussing later as well. So that word expectation, I think, is absolutely key.
Yeah, a hybrid model, Paloma says. Adoption of new technologies, plenty of stuff coming through. Okay, in a minute, I'm gonna shut the question down. We'll move on. So I see Tamania and Jeff are typing. Brilliant. Increased involvement of people with a background in digital tech, and people want to learn quickly, immediately, says Tamania. All right, I like it. Nicholas, is this good material for you going forward?
Absolutely, and I think we're going to cover off some of this as we move on. So I'll move to the next slide if that's all right, Don. I think I put this question in because I think I talked about the mission of our company, and I think the fundamental thing here is that our mission landscape and the mission landscape for L&D people in general is changing absolutely no end. So, what reaching the full potential through learning looked like, if you think about it, in the 1990s, this was the nascent years of being able to learn online. Back then, Encarta was a thing. I don't know if anyone remembers taking a CD and putting it into your computer, and then Encarta would load up and you could have access to learning in that way. And then in the noughties, the internet went mainstream and learning became much more accessible. And, we saw this enormous step change in the way that knowledge could be made accessible across borders. And just so you know, Articulate was actually founded in 2002, and Docebo was founded in 2005. So that was when we started to see the growth of these e-learning companies. And in the 2010s, e-learning really hit its stride. So we had this faster broadband, better software. We had this wholesale migration to the cloud, which I'll talk about in a second. And basically, we had the adoption of these tools for creating this really fantastic online learning experience. And then obviously at the end of the 2010s, what happened? Well, the pandemic came along and it changed everything, and all of our lives changed. And I think no one really realized how much that would happen. We saw this huge acceleration to remote work, and with that to remote training, and just this huge shift. And I think we saw that in the poll just now about, the way that we thought about how we could train our users. And many of the people in this audience will have faced challenges that seemed absolutely insurmountable. Whether you were being asked to onboard a new joiner who's never even seen their office, much less attended a training course inside it, or you were being asked to kind of deliver updated training when you had no access to the tools that you needed from home. So I think, we saw this huge change, and where are we? Well, we're in, it's a slightly strange time. We're still hybrid, but we're doing the in-person events again. So everything's changing a little bit. And we're trying to feel our way to this new normal as L&D specialists. And of course, as we went through all of these momentous changes, everything was changing around us as well. What we saw was business operations have been transforming in the last 20 years as well. And this is a sort of parallel underlying trend from the 90s through to today. We've had this explosive growth in cloud software. And so this chart actually just shows you the total size of public cloud software as a service market from 2008 to 2020. And you don't need to pay much attention to the numbers here, but if you look at that growth curve and take a second to think about what it means for L&D professionals, 10 years ago, training people on cloud software wouldn't have been a thing. And now it's a massive part of what we have to do as training professionals, is train our learners on cloud-based tools. So expectations came up in the discussion that we just had, and this unstable ground presents huge challenges for us. But we're here for our users, and I think the expectations of our users are pretty high. So we're expecting our learners in the business that they use the mandated tools that we've given them. Use the CRM system, use the sales systems. We're expecting them to get it right. So we want them to put the data in accurately. We want them to make sure that they're kind of reflecting the true status of business and the software that they use. And we're expecting them to do it from home. And doing it by yourself is quite a tall ask for a user inside a large company. And so, perhaps appropriately, from users as L&D professionals, we're being asked, can we onboard them? Can we teach them? And can we support them? And those are kind of really challenging questions for us, and these expectations are going up. We actually have a customer event on October the 20th, where we're going to be talking about the expectations being higher than ever of L&D professionals in the market. So, this is a really kind of changing world for us as L&D professionals. How are we doing? Well, I think the signals seem to show that actually employees are slightly underwhelmed. If you and we know that because we've got polls that say it. So Qualtrics they do an annual report called the Employee Experience Trends, and in 2022 they found that only 1 in 3 employees said that their experience with their company's technology exceeded their expectations. So people are, I think, a little bit disappointed here. Only 1 in 4 felt that their experience working at their office exceeds their expectations as well. So, this is a challenge, and one can make the argument that we as L&D professionals are failing our users a little bit here if we're not teaching them properly how to use their systems, and this causes a lot of stress. So Microsoft, they do some work trend index, and they asked, actually, this was specifically for frontline workers, but it would be surprising if the results weren't borne out across different job roles and different industries. And of all of the things that employees could change, 46% said that they wanted better technology tools that could make their job easier. And this would really reduce their stress. And what was interesting here is that was actually that was the 3rd most commonly cited thing that would make people's days better. And the first 2 were actually increasing pay or giving paid time off. And I thought what was so interesting here is that L&D professionals, we can't have much influence over pay rises, and we can't have much influence over paid time off. But we know that we can improve the technology experience and the technology tools that our teams are using. And that's what this presentation is really all about. This matters. The question has to be, does this matter? And fundamentally, it does matter, because at the most basic level, when you have employees who are kind of suffering in silence because they can't use the tools and they haven't had the training that they need to do their jobs properly, you end up with kind of 4 problems followed by 1 big problem. And first they slow down. The entire organization becomes a bit lethargic, and that costs more. The time that it takes to do things takes a bit longer. Productivity falls, and it costs more to do the same amount with your employees. And so the organization needs to kind of course correct a bit, and that costs revenue. And then finally, morale begins to fall as well. So employees become a bit frustrated and a bit disillusioned. And, I think we can all relate to, the idea that you're griping with your colleagues about how a certain tool doesn't work. And then finally, and this is the final big consequence, they leave. And that costs more than everything else, even if they don't leave a terrible review on Glassdoor, as in this example, where they talk about kind of the poor tools that they've been forced to use. Employees leaving is a huge cost to the business. And as L&D professionals, I think we can play a role in preventing that from happening. So another question for the audience, given what I've just said about how people might be suffering in silence, the question for us as everybody here is, can you think of areas where your teams inside your business might be struggling, but they might not be telling you? Are there areas where you think they might be getting up every day and having to use tools that they hate or that haven't been trained on properly? Any suggestions?
Nicholas, I find this idea of people struggling and suffering in silence, it's very recognizable. I think we've all been in situations where that happens. Yeah. I also think that there's an additional thing to this. People can be struggling and be frustrated, as you say, and they can want to leave. Or they may not even be conscious of it, but they might just regard this difficult thing they're trying to do, this system that won't quite work as they expect it to, this unnecessary number of steps which they can't quite remember to do something. They might just regard it as an inevitable part of the job, which will have the same effect of them getting annoyed, spreading discontent, and probably eventually leaving. And so I think they may, if everyone in the audience can just think about this, when we talk about people struggling, they may be struggling consciously, they may also just be struggling without really realizing that their adoption, particularly of software, is causing a problem. Actually, Jermaine is the answer that Jermaine gives, is adopting new software is one of the areas where people are definitely struggling. Anastasia is saying data management, which I think is, I think that's a case where people might be doing it unconsciously. Now, they're asked to do things with data, but they don't really know where to start or how to handle the data. I think that's one of the unconscious ones. And Dave Kelly is saying software not user-friendly. Well, I think that's both of them. You could both be conscious and unconscious about it. And Shanice is saying correctly using a tool that isn't used often. That's a really, yeah. So look, there's a strong stress here, Nicholas, on people saying, yep, a lot of it, apart from Anastasia's one, seems to be focused on tools and software that people are just, they come back to it, they can't use it, or they're unfamiliar with it. But hang on, Dan's got an interesting point. Collaboration software requires a whole new mindset to unlock the benefits. It's not just another place to keep things. And Dan's point is that you can struggle with that because it needs a whole different understanding about how to struggle, comment, collate work, and also probably provokes an emotional reaction, which software tools might not do. Wow. Okay, this is actually proving to be a very quite a profound discussion here. Sorry, I'm doing all the talking. You're the presenter, Nicholas. What's your view of all this?
No, not at all. I think a lot of this chimes true with the kind of challenges that we try to solve, at Omniplex every day, and specifically with Omniplex Guide. Things like adopting new software not being user friendly. We're going to come on to that in a little bit, and what Shanice said as well, correctly using a tool that isn't used very often. That's fascinating because that happens all the time.
Yeah.
You might only have to raise a purchase order once every 2 months.
Yeah.
And so how are you going to remember how to do that? It's a real challenge.
And it's so frustrating. You know you did it last month. And you can't quite remember what you have to do. Absolutely. Yeah, very recognizable. Paloma is saying lack of recognition at work. You can be struggling, not necessarily as a result of tools, but you can get the lack of recognition, and she's feeling. Paloma, I'm sorry you feel that way. You're part of the community, and the L&D community will support you. Let us know if we can support you in any way. Okay, I think we probably want to be moving on. So I see Roberto and Margarita are typing. Please do continue typing. Put your thoughts in, and we'll give some reaction to that, and then let's press on. Yeah, the context Margarita was saying earlier is really important. Attention management, attending numerous learnings and multitasking at the same time. I like that point, Roberto, is because asking people to switch attention, which is really what this is about, is very demanding, and it can really cause people to struggle, again, unconsciously. And meetings, says Roberto. I've worked from home since the year 2000, Roberto, and the biggest bonus is no more stupid meetings. I can't count the amount of time I've saved. That's enough about me. Nicholas, what do you think? And do you want to move on?
Absolutely, and I think my next slide sums up a lot of this sentiment, and that's that this stuff is important. And I thought this headline, which is from the Harvard Business Review, actually said it best. In a hybrid world, your tech defines your employee experience. People want to work from home, like Don, whether we like it or not. People are going to work from home, and so we have to be able to help them, and being able to help them use their tech defines that employee experience. So that section over, let's just take a look at some quick hard truths, because it might be time to stop kidding ourselves about what we can do with traditional training methods and modern software. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about that, because lots of us, I think, are losing this battle, but we might not know it yet. So 55%, and this came out of the Microsoft survey as well, 55% of workers said that they've had to use new tech, they've had to learn, new tech on the fly with no formal training or practice, which is quite a huge stat when you think about it. And I think the first hard truth is that realistically, everyone here will know what the learning curve looks like. It shows us that proficiency increases with experience. And this is kind of an S curve that has a slow start and end, and then some acceleration in the middle. In enterprise software, most learners are never going to reach the top of that learning curve. Expertise is basically a nice to have for most employees when it comes to systems training. It's not a realistic end goal for everybody. And I think that's something that we have to consider as L&D professionals, because we probably all know that feeling like we've finally mastered something, and then to realize that there's a whole lot that we don't actually know. And I guess something for the audience to consider here is a steep learning curve a good thing? It's a really interesting question. Is a steep learning curve a good thing? And actually, I would argue that if you can make it to the top, a steep learning curve is no bad thing. Because ideally, we'd want our business apps to look something like Instagram. It's so simple to use that we can just dive right in without any training, and we can become a very proficient user of Instagram in almost no time at all. And that would give us an adoption curve that looked more like this red line on the left, where we can become super proficient in a really short space of time. And what's interesting is that this is increasingly not just an ideal, it's a reality for the younger people on teams. So these people are digital natives. They come into businesses with smartphones in their hands, and they expect to be able to understand how to use software. So this is what we would ideally really like our business apps to look like and to feel like. But unfortunately, that's not the reality. The spoiler here, of course, is that these apps don't exist.
Nicholas, I have to ask, is that screenshot, is it real, or did you just make it up?
No, it's real. I did find it on the internet, but it is a real software application.
Right.
And it's worth thinking about, because I think we're kidding ourselves a little bit if we think that our software apps can be made really simple like Instagram, because realistically they can't. These apps, they're necessarily really complicated. They help us to manage multi-million, multi-billion pound operations. So they need to be a bit complex, and that's something that as L&D professionals we might not be able to do anything about. And unfortunately, even if we were able to make them really simple, they'd probably change tomorrow. And I put this in because I thought this was really funny. This was the 621-line feature spreadsheet listing all of the new features and changes that came with the Salesforce Winter 2022 product. Software changes all the time, and I think people mentioned that in our discussion. Enterprise software is complex, and there's not that much that we can do about it. So what's the holy grail? Well, ideally, we want training that's available at the right time. It's in the right place. It stays relatively up to date, so we don't have to go back and keep updating it whenever the system changes. And it doesn't present a burden to anybody, L&D teams, or the end users. And I think that came up in our discussion too. And I think learning in the flow of work is something that we can kind of it helps push us towards that holy grail. So this was popularized by Josh Bersin in 2018, which was a few years ago now, but it's a really interesting concept, and I would urge you to go and kind of read Josh's blog post on this. Over the last 20 years, we've been through these 4 evolutions of training, which is what you can see in his graphic here. We had self-selected learning via LMS in the early days, and then we had sort of learning paths for talent management as streaming became a reality in the 2010s. We had kind of this continuous learning, and then we had much more micro-learning just before the pandemic, and now we're at this new tipping point. And this kind of idea of learning in the flow of work is really just encapsulating some ideas that have come before. So, people expect to be served the content intelligently in the moment of need, in the flow of work. They don't have much time, so that learning needs to be extremely short form micro-learning that they can just get and then get on with their jobs. And so that they can get right back to work once they're done with their learning. And that's the idea of kind of learning in the flow of work. I thought this quote, which is again from Harvard Business Review, encapsulates it best. So for learning to really happen, it must fit around and align itself to working days and working lives. And that's what learning in the flow of work is all about. There are several benefits to it. It drives productivity. People can get back to work faster, which is great. It increases engagement with formal learning. So people often think that this is an either or. Actually, if you do the right delivery for both types of content, you're going to get higher engagement on both types of content as well. And finally, it improves knowledge retention because you can do some really clever stuff around, periodic reminders and this kind of stuff to really drive home the learning messages that you want to send. So huge benefits here. I put this in, sorry, there's a lot of text on this slide, but I find that it's quite helpful often to kind of reframe challenges in different ways. And these are some quotes from the HBR article that I referenced earlier. And there's sort of different ways of looking at what I've just discussed to reframe that challenge. And I guess the question here for us is, as L&D professionals, is have you considered these requirements in an L&D context inside your org? So the spokesperson from Santander in that article was talking about how employees use social media and apps in their spare time and to find the information that they need. It should be the same at work. Yeah. What Sainsbury's was saying is, often we deliver our training based on what a centralized group of people think would be useful, rather than what is actually going to enable our employees. And P&G said that the idea is that with learning in the flow of work, we can focus more on immediate business context and personalized needs. So, the employee experience of social media and learning can be more similar. We can be more targeted to employee enablement rather than just teaching what's possible, and we should be more personalized in our approach. And these, I think, are nice challenges for us to think about as L&D professionals. So, all of that said, how do we make learning in the flow of work a reality in our business? And, this is just designed to be a really simple guide on how you could get started following the presentation today. I think the first way to think about this is consider your role in this. L&D must play a central role in coordinating learning in the flow of work across an organization. And if you consider kind of a typical business need, you've got all of these stakeholders and they're probably going to know better than an L&D team where learning in the flow of work might be able to help. So if you think about business operations, they're going to know where there are systematic failures in the way that you do things at the moment. And I had a chat with somebody in our company the other day, someone in the finance team, and he was saying to me, I need to get sales to fill out this particular form properly so that I can do my job. And often it just doesn't happen. So it would be great if we could find a way to fix that. And I really liked that because I thought that was a really concrete, tangible challenge for business operations that an L&D person could listen to and say, yeah, I can help you with that through learning in the flow of work. The system owners are another great group for L&D teams to listen to. So system owners, they have direct expertise in the parts of the systems that trip people up. So if you think you've got a system owner, they might be working with Salesforce or Workday or one of these other big enterprise systems. They know where people get stuck. And they know that because they're probably answering all of these questions anyway. There's nothing more stressful being a system owner and being told that a huge update is coming to your system and that you have to prepare people for it. So system owners are really great people to talk to. And then finally, informal support channels. So, L&D needs to keep its ear to the ground so that we know what staff are talking about, what they're worrying about, what's coming down the road, all of this stuff that can be vital to rolling out learning in the flow of work in a useful way for the organization. So L&D is kind of going to bring all of this together. And then, I like to think of the way that we would roll out learning in the flow of work as a bit of a virtuous cycle. And it's a virtuous cycle, obviously, because it gets better over time. And I'm just going to dive into each of the 4 parts of this cycle, because I want to give you some really practical suggestions of the things that you can do.
Nicholas, just before you jump in, I'm going to quickly just make a point to the audience. Stuff's coming up, and we've got we'll have, after 5 or 10 minutes, Nicholas will wrap up, it'll be 1:45, then we'll have Q&A. There's a box underneath the slides where you can put questions in for Nicholas. Please use that box and put questions in that you've got around this or anything he's talking about. I'll raise them with Nicholas at the end. Okay, Nicholas, back to you.
Absolutely. So let's just jump into all 4 of these. So first of all, design. Oh, sorry. No. First of all, understanding. So we actually talked about this in a previous webinar on Omniplex Guide. Understanding is a really key part of being able to implement learning in the flow of work properly. And I think basically we want to kind of do this across 3 different things. Oops, sorry, I'm just going to skip back. So we want to talk about understanding processes, understanding systems, and understanding people. So for processes, you need to identify the business processes, which one's the most important to the company. And then you can really begin to understand where you're going to have a really high impact by rolling out learning in the flow of work to your teams. And you can gather this from a variety of different sources. But one of the best things that you can do is you can perform an audit of kind of who's using what systems across your high impact business workflows. And then you can start to analyze it to see where there are opportunities to be more efficient. The next thing is understanding usage. So this is going to help you to identify the red flags where your adoption can actually be improved a little bit. So you can ask your operations teams, your IT administrators, how are people using these systems? Are they using them universally? Are the outputs what people expect? How many carve-outs are there? So how many times are people supposed to use one system, but they're actually doing it a different way? And is the data that you're capturing accurate? And then finally, after systems usage, you want to ask the people. So we've got to support the people behind the platform. And this is really great. You need to get the data from the users. So you can ask people, what software are you scared of? What systems do you absolutely hate using day to day? Ask your support team, what software packages are people raising support tickets for? And where aren't people following processes and why? So that's kind of how we would go into the understanding part. And then once we know which systems we're talking about and the problems that we're facing with them, we can begin to kind of design a solution. And I think designing a solution, it's all around kind of considering things and then creating the content. So, you can identify your training needs, and it's tempting to start with a huge training needs analysis, but you should actually have some quick wins already. And it's quite scary for an L&D professional to work without, a big training needs analysis. But one of the nice things about learning in the flow of work is that, it's considerably lower effort than developing a full course from scratch. So maybe it's just a case of kind of doing a few smaller, quick things instead of doing a full training needs analysis. It shouldn't take weeks. Then you can identify your processes and your teams and your roles. And to be honest with you, some teams here are more suited to this than others. So sales teams, field teams, teams that are under high pressure, they can be great candidates for learning in the flow of work. You know, especially where they've got repetitive processes that are going wrong every time. Some teams aren't so suited. You know, if you have rigorous testing or, you know, compliance requirements, if you've got hard and fast date requirements, you might not want those processes and those roles, those teams to be part of this. After that, you can map your delivery methods. You know, you want to make your delivery as accessible as possible. So, you know, making sure that everyone can access it, whether they've got a really long attention span or whether they've got a short attention span. Make sure that you're delivering it really intelligently. So there's lots of AI tools that allow us to do really smart things with learning the flow of work. So an example from Omniplex Guide is if a user is on a certain page, it shows certain content, right? That's kind of a really powerful way to make sure that you're delivering the right content at the right time. And then finally, you want to plan for your content creation. So, you know, find a way to sketch out roughly what needs to be taught, and then kind of develop a plan that can get you from A to B in terms of that content, and finding the experts who can help you to provide that content to your users. After you've designed your program, you can deploy it. And so deployment is going to vary hugely. It depends on the training channels that you're choosing to focus on. In digital adoption, which is where I work, we typically advise a kind of 30-day timeline to get adoption support live, starting from the point where you sign up for Omniplex Guide. A custom app, it might take longer. An off-the-shelf product might be even shorter, but you probably want, you know, you probably want to do this in a phased way. That's what we tend to recommend. It's unlikely to be perfect first time, so you want to give yourself a bit of breathing space with your learning the flow of work implementation. But the best advice that you're going to get is probably going to come from those pilot employees in the first phase, which is why you want to do it in a phased way. And then secondly, you want to consider kind of how learning the flow of work is going to fit with that broader curriculum. You know, you need to think about that kind of 10% structured training element that you're still going to have, and that can be the tent pole around which you can structure your kind of learning in the flow of work curriculum. And it's doubly impactful when you can consider that broader curriculum of formal training alongside your learning in the flow of work implementation. And then finally, refining. And refining is the most exciting part of this for me, because it's really nice. You can refine in real time to really complete that virtuous cycle. And this is quite a nice thing, you know, because in L&D, it can be quite difficult to get real-time feedback on your courses. Courses come and go. It can be a one-off thing and you don't get the right signals. But with kind of modern learning the flow of work software, you can think about capturing the right data. So how are your learners responding? Are they opening or viewing those resources that you've prepared for them? You know, these powerful analytics on usage, which weren't always available for L&D professionals, you can capture, and you can make decisions because you've got that data. You know, I think with all of that extra information, you're able to evaluate and adjust, and then kind of improve as you go around that cycle. So this is how you'd sort of start to roll it out inside the organization. I think, you know, I didn't want to go too much into the whole process here without focusing on some quick wins. And so, you know, as L&D professionals, something that you can take away today to be working on this. And so if I was going to get started on this, if I wanted to get started with learning the flow of work straight away and to go back and do something really impactful for my organization, I'd probably do a couple of things here. So first of all, I'd start by finding out who's suffering silently, because that's going to enable me to build a business case for what I want to do inside the organization. So a couple of ideas for what you could do, you know, today. You can ask for a usage report on your top systems, and you can start there. And realistically, you know, the Pareto principle is probably going to apply here. You're going to get 80% of your issues probably from 20% of your systems. So if you can understand what those systems are, you're in a huge place to add tremendous value to your business. You can ask line managers as well to informally scope out some systems training issues. And a great question for managers to ask in one-to-ones: what can't you do which you think you should be able to do? It often yields some really insightful things from just having that conversation with employees. And if you have a pulse check-in, if you do a weekly check-in via software, or you have a pulse call or something, just ask a software question. It's free, it costs the organization nothing, but it can yield some really valuable insights. So find out who's suffering silently would be the first thing that I would do. The second thing is I would find the low-hanging fruit. So some ideas here for how we can really make progress on this quickly is you can incentivize company experts to share their knowledge. And this is kind of coming into content creation almost, because people are often quite happy to share their knowledge, especially when they're working from home. They've got no one else to talk to all day. They're very happy to kind of share what they know, and they can do it now in really creative ways. So smartphone videos or blogs or GIFs. You can build guides inside OmniBlock's guide, or you can offer people prizes for the best weekly knowledge sharing. And once you're going to have all of that information coming from your users, it will allow you to kind of then formalize it and distribute it to the rest of the company. Another thing that I think is really nice here is asking systems owners if their systems can be adapted to provide learning in the flow of work. So often, and like we can take Salesforce as an example here, something like Salesforce has the ability to customize pages. And if you can customize pages and you can get the agreement of the systems owner that you can do that, you can actually start to drop training into those pages without even needing any extra software, which I think is a really powerful thing to be able to do. And it's not done enough in organizations. The other thing that you can do is emails. If you know that you have regular emails going out to new joiners, weekly emails as part of kind of your company intranet or whatever, you can find ways to drop learning into those really easily. And finally, you can find the leaders who are already bought in. So, there will almost certainly be some leaders inside your organizations who are really bought into this idea of learning in the flow of work and can see the value of it. And so if you can find the ones that are already sold, you can land and expand. So that's finding the low-hanging fruit inside your organization. I think what's really nice here is people often think that this is something that they have to start from scratch, but that's not always the case. You can use the channels and the content that you've got. And, there are some really simple plugins out there for tools such as Slack and Teams that will allow you to surface content in the right way. And, often companies are paying for these tools without even realizing that they're paying for them. So something like Viva from Microsoft, or, other tools for Slack, that allows you to deliver content in really smart ways. You can implement chatbots, this kind of stuff. And it might just be a 10% project that you do in your spare time, but improving, the tools that people are using every day with really simple add-ons is a really high value way to add value to the business through learning in the flow of work. And finally, you can go out there and you can review your existing content for the opportunity to kind of chunk it or reformat it. So often training, it's all hosted in PDF files or kind of recordings. Can you break it up? Can you break up PDF files into one-sheeters that can be hosted on a page? Can you review your corporate videos and save timestamps that can be linked to from different places? Can you re-release existing content into new formats like podcasts? We've all got tons of training content floating around our organizations. So often, a really quick win is to just find it and surface it in the right way in a smaller format that people can access as they work. And with that, that's kind of a whistle-stop introduction to, approaching learning in the flow of work. And I just wanted to say that, learning is often seen as a luxury, but we all know that it's a necessity. But the onus is on us to make sure that the learners know that it's a necessity, to surface that requirement in the right place, and then to actually enable them to go about their jobs with the right learning at the right time. That's it from me. I'll hand back to Don.
Well, don't hand back to me. Let's share this moment together. I'm going to I'm going to ask people, please, I've got a bunch of questions for Nicholas based on what he's been saying, but please do drop questions into the chat or indeed into the questions box. There's his email address, and the references an ebook. There is the ebook link. Go ahead and download that. And also, here is Nicholas's email address. Nicholas, you're talking about a bunch of things there, particularly in the last few slides there. I want to go back to this idea of people suffering silently, because that really struck me as something that's really resonated with me. We talked earlier the fact that people might consciously know they are having a bad time, or they might be entirely unconscious. They might simply be unable to do things and not aware there are better ways of doing them. How do you discover whether people are suffering silently? Because if you go to them and say, oh, are you suffering silently? I don't think anybody's likely to say yes. And if they do say yes, they're probably the sort of person you don't want to have a conversation with anyway, because they enjoy talking about how miserable they are. So how do you establish trust at the beginning and then go on to have a conversation which helps you understand what the problem is and also helps them share in the right amount of detail where things are going wrong? So it's, if you like, it's the step before people sharing it. How do you establish the right atmosphere for them to feel they can do that?
Yeah, I think this is a super interesting question. And you know, a lot of the time, this idea of people suffering, it's not obvious that they are suffering until something goes wrong with the business. So, you know, we talk to people all the time and they come to us and say, you know, we've got this system, we've got this tool, and the data quality is really rubbish. You know, no one's using it as they should be. And if you think about it, the people behind that system must be really frustrated as well, because they're obviously trying to use this and they can't. And it's got so bad that the management in the organization have noticed, and that's why they've come to us. But I think, you know, some of the ideas that I talked about, things like pulse check-ins, really surfacing the ability to have this conversation within organizations is important, because oftentimes it might just be that they've never been asked. They just kind of live and they think this is the way that it is, as you said. You know, this is just a horrible piece of software to use. There's nothing I can do about it.
That's the system.
Yeah, that's the system. But you know, I think we want to make this a conversation that's acceptable to have inside businesses,
right? Where
people can actually say, you know, I hate using this tool. I wish it could be better. And I think it's just about finding the channels to allow them to express that to either directly to us or via the management to L&D.
And I wanted to come on to that management piece, because surely L&D has to establish a relationship with not just individual employees, but also management who can point out where their teams are being less productive as a result of whatever's going on. And then you can help the managers, and they then become your supporters and your agents of change in the organization, going back and saying L&D are doing a good job. So I always go on about how important managers are. I guess I'm asking you a leading question. Do you agree that managers are also very important?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, managers are, they're brilliant conduits, but I think the management of a business is really important for us, because it allows us to get really tangible about the benefits that we're delivering. So often we'll speak to management teams and they'll say, you know, this tool isn't working and you know, our adoption is really low. And we're able to work through the numbers on that and put an actual value on what that's costing the organization. And then that's a really fun way to kind of quantify the value of what we're doing, because the management can see that it costs so much money. And, you know, as L&D teams, we're able to then go in and fix it and say, well, look, we saved you that amount of money. It's you know, this was
how do you put the money value? How do you put the money value on that? How do you firstly determine, oh, they're wasting this amount of time, and then say this amount of time is worth this amount of money?
Absolutely, and it's not only time. So you can put a value on time. You can just you know, take an employee's kind of day rate or whatever you want to do. But where it gets really interesting is where you've got things like sales professionals who can't input the right products, or they can't work at the pace that they want to work at.
Yeah.
And then that's not just kind of bottom line stuff, that's top line stuff. And that allows us to kind of quantify more than just time. So it's about really understanding the teams who are struggling with this. What sort of individuals in the organization are they? What value are they adding to the business? And how can we add that value to them?
And that's part of the discovery or the understanding piece, isn't it? Where you're finding out, as you said, your 4 circles. That's the one where you start off, and without understanding the rest of the 4 circle or the other 3 circles, can't have the impact, because you have to understand what's going on in the business, don't you?
Absolutely. And, as I said at the beginning, my background's in consulting. So this is how I would always approach it. It's, you've got to understand what's happening in your business to be able to kind of affect any kind of useful change.
Let's talk about low-hanging fruit, easy wins. How do you convince your SMEs, your subject matter experts? You talked about how very often people are keen to do it. How do you convince them that how do you convince them that they may be keen to do it, but there's a process for doing it, and they'll get some sort of tangible reward at the end, not necessarily an Amazon voucher, but maybe some kudos? What sort of mechanisms can you have for getting those subject matter experts? Because they're the people often who, they could look around the office and see everyone doing it wrong, and rather than going talking to each person, they create something which is useful for everybody. But how do you get that working as a process?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, and you hit the nail on the head. It's about creating those reusable processes.
Yes.
So the problem is the subject matter experts, they often end up being the go-to point, and then their manager starts to think of them as the go-to person, and then suddenly that affects, if they get really busy, the entire organization gets affected, and that's a really bad.
Absolutely. They can't do their job, because they're helping other people all the time. It's a real issue that comes, particularly people who aren't working and who may be working in office, or they may be deskless, and because the transfer of information often in deskless environments, which is where most people work, is less efficient. Somebody who knows how to do something in one particular place, it just doesn't get spread around enough. So and then they can get bombarded with questions and they can't do their job. Sorry, I'm ranting. Nicholas, go on. How do we fix it?
I think you're absolutely right, and it's about telling them that they're creating kind of reusable content. So this isn't content that's worth, if you want to put a monetary term on it, this isn't like content that's going to cost, I don't know, £10. This is content that will cost £10 to create once, but actually it's going to deliver value for that business for such a long time. And if the SME thinks of it in terms of their time, they might have to spend a couple of hours doing it. It's going to save them so much time further down the road.
That's a really good point. Plus, we can give them, we can make sure the managers and the people in the organization give kudos to people who are doing that and give them a shout out. We underestimate, I think, the value of recognition in the workplace, as was mentioned earlier, as being something that's incredibly important to get people to do things, particularly discretionary effort. You talked about using channels and content. Could you just say a bit more about that? I'm a great believer in going where people are, fish where the fish are, people say. If you were talking about helping people in the flow of work with something like Slack, could you give an example of how you might do that?
Yeah, so I mean, this really depends on the software package. Slack is a very interactive tool. You're typing into it all the time. You're getting output from it all the time. And so in Slack, something like a chatbot is a brilliant way to surface content. So you can have chatbots where they're basically sophisticated backends to what is essentially a learning management or a kind of document repository, but they can pull out and extract information into the chat for the user. So basically you end up with this kind of nice conversational interface, which is like, can you show me some information on how to do X? And the chatbot will come back with the right documentation. So that's an example for Slack. But if I think of a tool like, let's say Microsoft Dynamics, which is something that's widely used inside businesses, we do a lot of work with tools like Dynamics and Salesforce because they're not so conversational.
Yeah.
But what we do is, OmniFlex Guide can pop the right information at the right time when the user lands on a page, depending on who the user is, what we know they're trying to achieve. That allows us to actually deliver the right information. And the content may have already been written. What we're doing is basically distributing it in a smart way, the right time, the right place to the user.
I've just realised with my big clock in front of me that it is coming up to 11 o'clock UK time, and time to be wrapping up. Thank you everyone who's been with us all the time from all over Europe. So on the left-hand side there, we've got the links to downloading the ebook. I'll see if we can't get these links sent out actually in the follow-up email tomorrow. So please do download the ebook, and there's the link in the top left-hand side there. Nicholas's email, the digital hub for the LSG webinars. A couple of extra resources there. I put in the link. You mentioned Josh Burson's article from 2018 about learning the flow of work, where he popularized the term. And also, Nicholas, you and I are both going to be at the Great Expectation at the Science Gallery in London. I'm doing a wrap-up talk, and that's on the 20th of October. I believe, is it a free event? I believe it is, but I believe that you have to have some criteria to be able to join. So it is free, but I think you have to be a decision maker to join, because there are limited steps. Got thanks coming already from Matt saying thank you both. Yes, I want to say thank you to Nicholas from Omniplex, because that's a substantial look at the practicalities of how to turn Josh's phrase, learning the flow of work, from an idea into a reality. It's been incredibly useful. And as Valentina says, it's been very insightful. Thank you very much. So I'm going to, it's 11 o'clock. We're going to wrap up now. Thank you very much. And Paloma, if you want to get in touch, please get in touch with me on LinkedIn and see if we can support you with some recognition. And Hong says, I've taken away a lot from the session and a starting point in developing my team. I always feel, because we do put a bit of work into preparing these sessions, we do rehearsals, we check everything. When we feel that it's been valuable and something's changed as a result, that's great. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to wrap up now, close the room, and look forward to seeing you, I hope, at 12 o'clock UK time, in 1 hour's time, when we're getting on with our second webinar of the day with Bob Mosier from the States. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. And once again, thank you very much to Nicholas Holmes from Omniplex for taking us through the practicalities of learning in the flow of work. Nicholas, thank you.
Thank you.